So, we are back. Oh, well. As you can hear by the loveliest noise in the world, or at least one of them, we are back, and we are nice and Anyway, with what I was saying originally, we are back after an over-year-long hiatus, filled with many trials and tribulations, I'm sure, for everybody. But we are trying a bit of an invention today. So, you may have heard of the horror of the turducken, or perhaps the blasphemy of the pie-caken. Well, today I decided that I wanted to get in on my own little lair slash combination dismay, if you will. So, what we are doing today is what I'm calling, at least for now, a winter holiday layer pie. And with that winter holiday layer pie, there's a couple of flavors that come up for at least me and my family as kind of key to the whole thing. So you have your pumpkin pie, you have your apple pie, you have your pecan pie. Cranberries often play quite a large role. And then if you want to go kind of sweet as far as a drink goes, you have eggnog as well. And these are the flavors that we are all throwing together into one pie shell to see how it comes out. Now, as I am sure you can see, as you know, they're all in the frame. We've already made up our fillings for the most part. So we are about to actually build this pie up. Now, with that, the first layer that we are going to be doing is the pumpkin. Next, we are going to be doing apple and cranberry. And then after that, we will have the pecan. So, with the recipes that I used, I will go ahead and put the originals down below. I did make some changes as well to kind of have it fit with what we were doing. So those changes I'm going to probably put in parentheses next to kind of the areas that were changed, you know, all that sort of good stuff. And then as far as any sort of major changes go, I did want to make sure that the pie layers were kind of as separate and their own thing as possible within the context of the pie. As you can see, that already has kind of failed because, you know, the pecan pie part is liquid, which it's not really surprising. But anyway, with that, I did kind of mess with the way the spices were in the layer. So the pecan layer is just vanilla and sugar and corn syrup pretty much, so didn't really have to do a whole lot there. With the apple layer, it did call for cinnamon and nutmeg, which I did stick to, and then in the pumpkin pie layer it called for pumpkin pie spice, which is usually cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice, and clove, if I remember correctly. Now, since that would be extremely similar to the apple, with the pumpkin layer I actually only did clove and ginger just to kind of make it a little bit of a different thing. As I'm sure you can also see with the changes, the pecans are actually a little bit crushed up, and that's usually not how it's done. So one thing I actually learned years ago with pecan pie is if you chop up the nuts, it's actually quite a bit better with the pie. You know, you get more surface area for the batter, I suppose, to caramelize with the nuts, and it's easier to cut through, frankly, too. You know, when you make that pecan pie with the whole pecans, sometimes you have to hit a whole pecan, kind of crumbles. It's its whole, you know, thing. So crunching them up really is the way to go. And what I did is I took half of the called for amount and really ground them down to like really fine, like almost going to be a streusel on top, or if it was going to be part of a crust even, sort of fine. And the other I did more of a rough chop, kind of leaving more whole pieces, not entirely whole though as well. So we are all layered up and ready to go, which means we are gonna go ahead and pop it right in the oven. So, as I'm sure you probably remember from the beginning, with this dessert, I was also mentioning incorporating eggnog. Well, that's what this is, except not really. So, with my time management skills and when this is being shot, I know that there is no way that this is going to come out before Christmas. So eggnog doesn't make that much sense. However, if we get a little bit of champagne in here, we can kind of incorporate New Year's in, and then I need to get it out before New Year's, and that's a lot more achievable if that actually happens. So this is actually a champagne custard rather than the eggnog custard I was planning on going with originally. So with this recipe, it calls for a bain marie or bain marie, or I don't know, it's French. I don't know how that's pronounced. So the best approximation I could see is it's kind of a double boiler, which I also don't have. But what I'm going to do to kind of make up for that, boil one pot of water, put another pot on top of that as I'm constantly stirring, and we'll see how it goes. So we have everything all done. As you can see, the pie maybe it was a little bit overdone. Turns out that needed more time than the recipe called for by a fair amount, or I put it in for too long, but you know, we'll see how it tastes. I did have to take out a few cranberries though, because I got a little bit too dark, a little bit too burned. Didn't want those in there, but all said, still plenty of cranberries. We're still good to go, I think. We also have our champagne cream up there. So we're going to stick this in the fridge, cover this up for the night, because it is pretty late at this point. Give it a try tomorrow. It is the next day, and let's just try it. With each part being separate like that, I figured might as well try them separately, and then of course we'll have to try them together since it is kind of supposed to be on the same layer, but let's go ahead here. So with the pie on its own, it's definitely good. I guess I kind of run into the issue I was afraid I might have, where the flavors are kind of running together a little bit. You can't really get the pecan layer. The pecan layer kind of just absorbed into the apple and cranberry layer. But it is still good. Maybe not necessarily worth the effort that went into it, but good. But let's go ahead and try this champagne cream custard here. Ooh. Okay. Now that's pretty good. Definitely very champagne-y tasting. Still kind of has a little bit of an alcohol-y taste to it, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, it's just kind of like sweet champagne. You can taste that it's whipped cream, pretty rich. Yeah, it's pretty good. Now let's go ahead and try them together. Okay, so the first kind of hit of taste that I got was like, oh, these flavors don't go together, like for an instant. But then it got actually really good. So it was kind of like, you know, you have the nice whipped cream on top of these kinds of pies usually. And this one was just kind of like that first kick of weight, but then you get used to it. And it's just almost like it's like that whipped cream, but better actually. So it has a little more flavor and all that. But I've tried it. It's good. I hoped it would have been better, but it was still good. But now I want to see what other people think. Okay, so I've had a couple people try everything, and I've tried everything again myself after a few days, and I just want to kind of go over now what their thoughts were, what my expanded thoughts were having tried it everything again, and kind of recommendations based off of my thoughts and, you know, what went wrong. So the first thing I wanted to go over was actually the pie portion of the dessert we made, seeing as how that was kind of the main component of it all. The group consensus was pretty much that it was good. It was a very good pie. Didn't really give me much details beyond that, besides everyone thought it was good. So moving swiftly on. With the second try, there was something that I did notice that I do think the pumpkin and the apple layer did actually separate pretty well. Having those spices separated, you could tell that they were separated the way I mentioned earlier in the video, and that did turn out very nicely. Now, with the way everything turned out, a couple recommendations I would have. Firstly, if you wanted to make this just a 2-layer pie, I think that could go very well. The pumpkin and the apple, like I was saying, did go well together. And then one of the recipes I actually used was for a pumpkin pecan layer pie. So doing that, I would imagine, would go well as well. But that pecan layer and that apple layer, just as we found out, don't really play that nicely together. Now, the second set of recommendations would be if you wanted to keep the pecan layer on top. Now, keeping the pecan layer on top would be kind of difficult, as we found out, because it kind of soaks in. So I guess what I would say is almost kind of to have it on top, you'd have to combine it almost. You could just put pecans into that apple cranberry layer, and I think that would be pretty good. You get the pecan crunch, you get the pecan taste, but that'd also be kind of boring. It wouldn't have any of the further pie taste, you know, that sort of thing. So another thing you could do is you could try and candy the pecans first. Now, the only issue I can see with that is if you are candying the pecans, have that sugar coating, that could kind of have the same problem we already had, where the sugar would just kind of dissolve into the apple layer and would have been effort for nothing. And the third suggestion I would have if you were to go this route is actually the one I would try if I were to do this again, keeping the pecan layer on top, would be to actually do a streusel. Now, I actually have a really good pecan streusel recipe that I got from a sweet potato casserole recipe that I'm going to put in the comments, the description down below. I'll put the sweet potato casserole recipe there too. I mean, might as well. More things for you. But that is definitely the way I would go. I think it wouldn't really absorb into the apple pie, just because, you know, apple pie streusel pies are a thing, so there's kind of a history there of it not going poorly. And yeah, I think that's kind of the way to go. Now, the third set of recommendations I would have is actually switching up the order of the layers. Obviously, this one with the 3 layers didn't really work out that well. It would all kind of depend on the buoyancy, kind of where you'd want everything to go, which is not something I really messed with, seeing as how a pecan layer is so liquid, it would probably still be the issue. But if you put it on the bottom, put it in the middle, all that sort of stuff, unfortunately, it wouldn't get that crust like I was kind of mentioning earlier. But I mean, you know what they say, there's nothing wrong with being on the bottom. Another thing I actually wanted to say here real quick as well is with that apple layer, I did end up sticking it in that sugar and spice combination in the fridge for a little while. So they did end up macerating, but I mean, I actually looked it up, and apparently it's maceration when the fruit is sitting in its own juices, but the actual process of the juice getting drawn out of the fruit is osmosis, and this actually doesn't matter, I'm getting off track. So I was worried about this pie being too goopy. Now, it wasn't. It was perfectly fine. It wasn't too wet, and that maceration, for lack of a better term, probably did help with that, so I would recommend doing that. However, not doing that step, it might still work out fine. I don't really know. All right, let's talk about that champagne custard. So this actually turned out to be pretty divisive amongst the group that tried it. Now, half of the group, myself included, thought that it was fine, completely fine, nothing wrong with it, tasted good, you know, all that sort of good stuff. And the other half, well, the other half had an extreme look of disgust come across their face when they tried it. Now, one of the people that tried it and really didn't like it said they thought it was very bitter, which is kind of interesting because that's not something I really got out of it. But, you know, we all have different taste buds. So I wouldn't really recommend having this champagne custard on its own, especially if you're sensitive to bitter flavors or if you don't at least decently like champagne, which is pretty obvious, but whatever. But even beyond that, I don't know if I would really do this on its own too. It's a little bit one note, kind of just champagne sweetness. You got the eggs and the cream and like, great, but it kind of comes off as more of an ingredient, which is kind of what we were using it for, or a base even. Now, actually, this recipe would be improved possibly if you kind of tweaked with it a little bit. So you could maybe add some orange juice, make it kind of a mimosa custard, or maybe even a little Chambord, get a little bit of that raspberry kind of booziness in there. You know, actually, you could take this recipe and mess with it. Obviously, you'd have to mess with the ratios too and all that sort of stuff. And if you put some hard alcohol in there, you might be able to make some kind of bougie pudding shots out of that. Now, that's kind of an interesting idea. Let me know in the comments below if that sounds like a good idea to a video, because that might be something that I do now that I think about it. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say about the custard is I did keep an eye on the temperature, which is what the recipe called for, and it was, the hottest I saw it get was like between 170, 175. Now, the boiling point of alcohol is approximately 173 degrees Fahrenheit, which from what I saw is approximately 78 degrees Celsius, if that makes more sense to you. So another thing to consider is if you do not want alcohol or do not need, you can't have the alcohol in a recipe like that, the alcohol might not have fully boiled out of this, so another thing to keep in mind. Well, when you put it all together, something interesting does kind of happen, which I touched on earlier. Like I said, I do like both the flavors together, but a little bit more interestingly, the members of the group that just hated that custard actually ended up liking them both together. So whatever's in the pie is canceling out the supposed bitterness or the supposed bad flavors in the custard, which is pretty neat. So I guess what I would say though on that second tasting that I did was I feel like the custard was kind of overpowering some of the flavors in the pie, he said, as if he knows what the hell he's talking about. Specifically the pumpkin. I feel like I didn't get a lot of pumpkin in those kind of bites with the custard. So I guess what I would recommend is if you are going to do the custard, don't have a ton of it with this pie. Or it might even be better if you were to do just, a normal whipped cream layer or, whipped cream on the side, or maybe a cheesecake layer or something like that. So like, as much as these two things go together, I would try something different personally. So if you wouldn't mind giving me some of your engagement by either commenting or hitting one of the buttons below, I would very much appreciate it. Or not. You live your life how you want to live your life, but regardless of what you do, thank you very much for watching the video, and hopefully you'll see fit to watch what I have in the future.